The year is 332 BC, and the great ruler Alexander the Great has just arrived in Egypt. His army has already defeated the Persian king Darius III. However, not everyone in Egypt has been so quick to submit to this foreign conqueror. While the pharaoh has fallen, his successor is nowhere to be seen, but Alexander knows that Egypt is one of the wealthiest nations in the world, and he intends to make it his own. It's me. Welcome to the series. Today, we will be looking at how Alexander the Great took over Egypt. Before we look at Alexander's invasion of Egypt, it's important to take a look at the state of Egypt before his arrival. We have already done a number of videos on ancient Egypt, but let's summarize quickly here. Ancient Egypt was a cradle of civilization, and many scholars consider it the first true empire in human history. It had a stable government structure, strong military forces, complex religious beliefs and customs, an advanced economy, and innovations in art, science, and technology. The prosperity of Egypt lasted for thousands of years because of its favorable geography. The annual flooding of the Nile River fertilized the soil and provided food in abundance. Its natural borders protected it from invasion, and its central location along important trade routes brought wealth. However, during the late period of ancient Egypt, the country had become a province of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Egypt had previously been part of the New Intermediate period, after Egypt split into two regions, Nubia and Kemet. In 700 BC, the Assyrians took advantage of the civil war in Egypt to conquer the south. Later, the Assyrians would be replaced by the Persians, then the Ptolemaic kingdom, and finally, Alexander the Great. Like most conquerors, Alexander had no intention of treating Egypt as equals among equals. He saw the Egyptians as barbarians. However, he also recognized the value of their sophisticated culture. On his way to India, Alexander made a detour to the temple of Siwa to consult the oracle of Siwa, who told him he was indeed the son of Zeus, the king of the gods. As a result, he proudly proclaimed himself pharaoh. Despite his short stay in Egypt, Alexander implemented several policies, such as minting gold coins in Memphis, appointing Macedonian governors over the provinces, establishing Alexandria as the capital city, and encouraging trade between Egypt and Greece. He also implemented religious tolerance in his empire, which allowed for the coexistence of polytheism and monotheism. Unfortunately, Alexander died at the young age of 32, having never visited the southern parts of his empire again. Upon his death, his generals divided his empire among themselves at the famous Treaty of Babylon. One of his generals, Ptolemy I, governed Egypt after securing the throne with the help of the royal family of the last pharaohs. Soon, Ptolemy declared himself pharaoh and founded the Ptolemaic kingdom, which lasted until 30 BC. Ptolemy I's policy of cultural exchange between Egypt and Greece led to the establishment of the Library of Alexandria. According to legend, Ptolemy I asked each ship entering the harbor to donate a copy of each book they had. Soon, the library became one of the largest and most comprehensive collections of knowledge in the world. It was considered one of the 7 ancient world wonders. During the early period of the Ptolemies, Egypt prospered due to the introduction of Greek administrators who were more skilled in business and accounting than the Egyptian bureaucrats. The Ptolemies also continued the traditional Egyptian system of tax collection and labor service. The peasants farmed the land in return for state protection and a portion of the harvest. In contrast to their Greek predecessors, the Ptolemies pursued a policy of cultural assimilation. They built Greek cities and promoted Greek customs, but they were careful not to antagonize the Egyptians. The Egyptians were free to practice their religion and customs, except for those related to the cult of the pharaoh, which was now seen as a divine institution. The Ptolemies reorganized the administration of the kingdom and introduced a new currency, the tetradrachm. They also established a naval force in the eastern Mediterranean. The Ptolemies faced many challenges, both from within and outside the kingdom. The Seleucids frequently invaded Egypt, as did the Nabateans and the Armenians. Moreover, there were internal revolts by the Egyptians against their Greek overlords. The Syrian emperor Antiochus the Great even briefly conquered Egypt and forced the Jews there to convert to Greek paganism. However, his successor, Seleucus II, restored Egyptian polytheism after realizing that attempts to impose Hellenism on the Egyptian population had been a mistake. As the power of the Seleucids waned, the Ptolemies grew in strength. Ptolemy III. Euergetes successfully defended Egypt against the rising power of Rome and extended his influence into the Levant. He recaptured Jerusalem from the Seleucids and restored the Temple of Jerusalem. He also launched a naval campaign in the western Mediterranean, where he was defeated by the Romans. In the east, Ptolemy collaborated with the Mauryan emperor Asoka the Great to establish diplomatic relations between Egypt and India. However, Ptolemy II's Philopator's alliance with the Seleucids caused tensions with Rome. The Romans eventually invaded Egypt and imposed harsh terms on Ptolemy, forcing him to pay war reparations. The kingdom was now effectively a Roman client state. Ptolemy V. Epiphanes attempted to break free of Roman influence, but he was defeated and forced to flee to Athens. He died there in 204 BC, ending the direct Ptolemaic line. His widow, Cleopatra Thea, acted as regent for their son, Ptolemy VI. The boy pharaoh died after only a few years, and Cleopatra took the title of sole pharaoh. Cleopatra's reign marked the end of the Ptolemaic era and the beginning of the Roman era in Egypt. She was the last pharaoh of ancient Egypt. When she came to power, Egypt was still a prosperous kingdom, rich in culture and natural resources. However, it was also a client state of Rome and subject to its policies and ambitions. Cleopatra was well aware of the precarious situation of her kingdom, and she worked hard to maintain its independence and dignity. She did this through diplomacy, intelligence, and personal charm, especially with the Roman leaders. She had relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, who helped her secure her throne and expand her influence. But her actions also made her enemies among the Roman nobility, particularly Octavian, who was Caesar's adopted son and heir. Cleopatra's conflict with Octavian led to a civil war in which she sided with Mark Antony and his allies. But in 32 BC, Octavian defeated Antony's fleet at Actium, ending Cleopatra and Antony's hopes of restoring the Egyptian navy and independence. After the battle, Octavian sent troops to occupy Alexandria and force Cleopatra and Antony to commit suicide. With Cleopatra's death, Egypt lost its last pharaoh and became a province of Rome. The Ptolemies had ruled Egypt for 300 years since Alexander the Great had conquered the country and established the Ptolemies as its rulers. Their dynasty had produced some great pharaohs, such as Ptolemy I, who had founded the dynasty Ptolemy II, who had made Alexandria one of the greatest cities in the ancient world, and Cleopatra, who had tried to save Egypt from Roman domination. However, most of the Ptolemites were weak and ineffective rulers who had squabbled and fought among themselves and with other powers such as Rome. The Ptolemites had also neglected the needs of the people of Egypt, who had suffered from high taxes, inflation, famine, and disease. By the end of the Ptolemaic era, Egypt was a shadow of its former self. It was poor, divided, and humiliated. The people of Egypt had lost hope in their pharaohs and their future. When Cleopatra died, she left no heirs. So Octavian, who was later known as Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, became the ruler of Egypt. He annexed Egypt to Rome and made it a part of his empire. He also changed the name of Alexandria to Caesarea. The decline of Egypt under the Ptolemies was due to several factors. One was the lack of continuity in leadership. The Ptolemies had a succession crisis almost every generation, as the male members of the royal family died young or were assassinated. This created instability and uncertainty in the kingdom. Another factor was the interference of outside powers. The Ptolemies had to deal with threats from the Seleucids, the Nabateans, the Armenians, and later Rome. These external conflicts drained the resources and manpower of Egypt. A third factor was the cultural gap between the Ptolemies and the Egyptians. The Ptolemies were Greek by origin and culture, while the Egyptians were Egyptian by origin and culture. The Ptolemies did not speak Egyptian languages. They did not understand Egyptian customs and traditions. They did not care about Egyptian religion and values. They ruled over the Egyptians as if they were a colony or a province. And this created resentment and resistance among the Egyptians. They saw the Ptolemies as foreigners and oppressors. They did not accept the Ptolemies as pharaohs or as equals. They continued to worship their own gods and pharaohs and rebel against the Ptolemite rule whenever they could. So the decline of Egypt under the Ptolemaic rule was a slow and painful process that lasted for centuries. It was a process that turned a great kingdom into a mediocre province, a process that turned a great civilization into a forgotten memory. But it was also a process that laid the foundation for a new era in Egyptian history, an era of Roman domination and transformation. What do you think? Why do you think Egypt declined under the Ptolemies? What do you think happened to the Egyptian people after the Romans took over? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to give us a like. Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.